Welcome, warriors. In today's episode, I am blessed to speak with a woman who has 5 children, and each of her pregnancies was a different experience. Grab a tissue and listen to this mother share how she went from knowing nothing to being highly trained and able to advocate for herself. Let's rock. Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. Brigid is a wife, mother of 5, and is passionate about supporting moms through their birth journeys with both grace and strength. She believes in the power of holistic, joyful birth experiences and encourages women to trust their instincts and to lean into their faith. As a certified women's health coach and fertility awareness expert, Brigid helps women heal from birth trauma, guiding them toward inner peace and resilience. She loves helping mothers process tough experiences, rediscover their confidence, and embrace their motherhood journey with strength and joy. When she's not working with clients, Brigid enjoys life on the farm with her family, whether that's watching her kids ride bikes, spending time with her horses, or getting interrupted by kids every 2 minutes while reading a good book. But before we share Brigid's birth stories, here is a review from Shay H. She says, "Love this. This is such an encouraging show. Definitely listen in." Thank you, Shay. I appreciate you encouraging others to listen to the show. When you encourage others to listen to the show and you share it, that is how we continue to grow. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please head to Apple Podcasts, leave a review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast. It really only takes a few minutes of your time. And come join the Warrior Words Facebook group. We have inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. Just go to facebook.com/groups/warrior words and request to join. A few questions pop up after hitting that request button. Just answer those, and I look forward to getting to know you in there. Now, on to the show. Hey everyone, as you heard in the intro, we have Brigid Tebaldi here with us today. Welcome, Brigid, to the Warrior Words podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate you being able to make time in your schedule. I know that you are a busy mom, and that's actually what we're here to talk about today is a little bit of a motherhood story, more like a birthing story. So
Yes.
do you want to just jump right in and
Yeah, for sure. So I do have my little 6-month-old here. He was supposed to be playing with his older sibling, but I guess wants me. So you shouldn't hopefully hear or see him, but just in case you do. So my story is that I'm a mom of 5. I am a wife. We live in Pennsylvania, and whenever I first had my first child, I was like, whoa, because I had no past experience with kids.
Mhm.
I knew I wanted kids, but it was like something that would that would happen later.
Right.
And whenever I found out that I was pregnant only 2 months after our wedding, it was like, oh, okay.
Surprise.
Yeah. It wasn't a surprise because it's like I knew that it could happen because like
Yeah.
we were practicing NFP, but it was like, no, like it doesn't happen that fast. Like I need a year or so. But no, God had other plans.
Yes.
So our kids are how old are they now? 8, 6, 4, 2, and 6 months old. And yeah, so again, my whole story really just started whenever I had my children because it really was like the most transformational thing in my life.
Mhm.
And that might seem pretty obvious to everybody, but I think the thing that was really um, different is that they have forced me in the nicest way possible to be the person that like I know I'm supposed to be. So they have made me be stronger. They have made me really stand my ground, put up firm boundaries. And not to do it for myself necessarily, but to do it for them. And again, it's just been like the most transformational thing.
Wonderful. Yes. And children can be um, very challenging, but I do think that they are one of God's greatest blessings and gifts. They teach us a lot. And I did want to point out for listeners who may not be Catholic or who may not know what it is. NFP stands for Natural Family Planning, and it is a method that husbands and wives can use together to plan their births or their not their births their pregnancies in a very natural way. So if you wanted to add anything more about that, I that's just more of a general overview.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. There's different methods you can use, but again, they have a 99% effectiveness rate, most of them. It's not the rhythm method that like your grandmothers learned. They've really come leaps and bounds from then. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, I think there was an issue with your first pregnancy that maybe led you to do things a little differently in subsequent pregnancies. So, can you tell us a little bit about the pregnancy and your birth process with your first?
Yeah, so I've always been pretty fit in terms of physicality and everything like that. So whenever I went into, and I was seeing an OB at the time, because that's
Mhm.
sort of what I thought everybody did.
Right.
So I was seeing the OB and everything was going fine until like the third trimester, whenever he would measure my bundle height, which is basically just like how big your stomach is. And he would always say that I was measuring small. So every single time that I went in, he had me do an ultrasound to check for amniotic fluid to make sure that I wasn't leaking any fluid and everything like that. And at the time, it was like, oh, this is so great. We get to see our baby on ultrasound like every single week, basically. Looking back, I'm like, oh, that probably wasn't the best thing. But at the time, it was like, oh, okay, this is kind of annoying because like the appointments were longer, and he just kept telling me like, you need to drink more water, even though I was drinking so much water. Um, and I was again very, very fit because I at the time was a horse trainer, so I was not that I was riding whenever I was 3 months pregnant, but I was still very, very active, teaching lessons, walking around all day pretty much.
Mhm.
So then whenever the birth came, again, I didn't really know what was happening. I literally did not do anything to prepare for it. Like I didn't even read one book. I didn't listen to any podcasts. I just figured that it would happen the way that it was supposed to happen. For by the grace of God, it went relatively fine. Um, it was interesting though because I did not have an epidural and it was doing just a natural labor. And so whenever the doctor came in, and he was very late to coming in, whenever he finally came in, he was kind of shocked because I was in pain, and the nurses had told me to stop pushing, which if you have ever given birth, it's like nearly impossible to stop pushing whenever your body wants to push. So
Yes.
they literally held my daughter's head in,
Oh,
and
geez.
that caused forget if it was a second or a third degree tear, but it tore up to my urethra, which was incredibly painful.
I can
Um,
imagine.
and then, yeah, so the first birth wasn't too terrible. It was really the second birth that was like whoa, what happened? And with
Okay.
that one, same deal. Everything was going pretty okay during the pregnancy itself. I was having high blood pressure issues only whenever I would go into the doctor, which at the time, again, I didn't really know anything about. But now looking back, I'm like, I was so nervous to go in because
Mm-hmm.
I never felt comfortable going there. And it wasn't any the doctor did necessarily. It was just he was an older gentleman and just never really like jived. I just went with him because that's who was local and that was easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So again, had some blood pressure issues, wasn't a huge deal. And then when I was 39 weeks, I woke up around 6 o'clock, was doing some laundry, and started just to feel some things happening. But at that point, I had already gone through labor once, so I was like, okay, I'm probably in early labor, nothing too crazy. It wasn't even contractions; it was just more of like I felt different.
Mm-hmm.
And so told my husband probably would have a baby sometime soon, but like go ahead and go to work because he worked about 20 minutes away. And then around 8 o'clock, I started getting contractions, or 8:30, sorry, about yeah, 8:30 contractions were about pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
And they came pretty much out of nowhere. And then called my husband. He got home. He like flew to the hospital, got to the hospital at like 9:56 or something. And then my son was born at 10:13. And
Wow.
so it happened very, very fast, which sounds great. Except you really don't have time mentally to prepare for it because I was literally like folding laundry and sitting on the floor with my daughter doing a puzzle when it was like these intense contractions started
Mm-hmm.
out of nowhere. So after his birth, it was kind of strange because I live in a small town, so there was no OB or anything in the hospital. So the nurses sort of just like whisked him away. I didn't know if he was okay. I didn't hear him crying or anything. Eventually, they gave him back to me and said everything was fine. I was able to get changed because I gave birth in my clothes. And then everything was good. I felt awesome. I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. I could go home right now. And then about 5 hours later, I was sitting in bed. I had just gotten up. I sat back down. I went to nurse him, and blood went everywhere. Like, uh, like it was literally just like again from 0 to 100. And my mother-in-law was in the room, and she was like, "Give me the baby. Press the call button." So I gave her the baby, and I was like, "Why am I giving you the baby?" And she was like, "Just press the call button." So then I finally press it, and then I look down, and I'm like, "Oh, there's blood everywhere." And at
Wow.
that point, I pretty much went into probably shock. They started calling a code. Everybody came rushing in. The nurses were like squeezing my stomach and not understanding because after you have a baby, your uterus shrinks down pretty rapidly and gets hard. And if it doesn't, they can push on your stomach and like feel that it's kind of boggy or soft. So the nurses were like pushing on my stomach and they were like, it's hard, it's hard. We don't understand where is all this blood coming from? So I was whisked away into surgery, which was not a great experience because the anesthesiologist like shoved papers in my face to sign. And I remember looking and being like, my husband signed those. She was like, no, if you're conscious, you need to sign them. So I don't even know what they said. It was probably some consent of some sort. So I signed the papers, and then whenever we get into the OR, she takes off my necklace, which is a crucifix that I wear. And I was like, "Do you have to take that off?" And she said, "Yes, in case we need to resuscitate you." And I was like, "Oh, okay.
Jeez.
Well, that's not great." But I came out of the surgery fine, thankfully. So it ended up having an artery tear, not anything that's typical. My OB had never, I think he said he had never seen it, or he'd only seen it one other time in his like 40-year practice. So very, very rare. And afterwards, whenever the PA would come in to like talk to me, because I didn't see the OB again after that, she would just I would ask, I'd be like, well, what happened exactly? And she would just say like, oh, you don't want to know. And
Yes, you
so
do.
I know. So I ended up actually requesting my medical records, and because they just told me that it was an artery that tore. They were able to find it, they sewed it up, and everything would be fine. But other than that, there was like nothing else, like no reason why this happened.
Mhm.
And I know that they can't say for sure, but there was
Right.
no like speculation why it happened, or like, is it going to happen again, and that sort of thing. And it's kind of funny, in my records, there's literally one sentence that is like patient taken to surgery in the, and then finished in the recovery room fine or something like that. It's like there's nothing
That's
in it.
it.
It was like a
Wow.
major surgery, had a blood transfusion, like all this stuff. And so um after that birth, had a lot of, I would say probably PTSD. I never actually saw anybody clinically, but I would
Mhm.
assume that that's what it is because I had major sleeping issues, and not like the normal newborn sleeping issues, but like
Right.
I would wake up terrified that I was bleeding to death. Um, I would make my husband like be like check me every 10 minutes to be like, am I still alive? Like, am I bleeding? And had like some postpartum rage, was just feeling really, really scared.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, I was so scared to ask for help though, because I felt like if I asked for help, then that means that like I don't appreciate my baby, that I'm a bad mom, that like maybe the babies would be taken away from me, all those sorts of feelings. So I just sort of like got through it on my own. Eventually, I did get help a couple of years later, and it was just again not a good experience. So that is what really has led me to what I do now, which I can talk about later on. Um, but after that second birth, I did go on to have another hospital birth, and it was not great, but it was fine. It was
Well,
an induction.
I'm just surprised that I mean, knowing my own story, my own birth story, and you just, I guess, you just get surprised that you go back in for another one, that that you're
Yeah.
willing to try it again. And I know as Catholics, we do stand at the altar and we
Mhm.
promise, to be open to life and to go between the fear you just expressed
Yeah.
and that vow that you made. It seems like a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't easy. I was very nervous. That's why I think I was using the same OB, same thing. And I think he was kind of nervous as well. And because he would say things like, oh, we'll probably like need you to get to the hospital before labor even begins, and talk about induction. And same thing, I was having some blood pressure issues, only in the office though. So I would go in, my blood pressure would spike to like 140 over 90 is the highest it ever got. And then 20 minutes later, whenever I'd get home, I'd check it again and it's like totally normal, like 117 over 20 or something. So I
Hmm.
did some non-stress tests and all those sort of things. And I think he was looking for like an excuse to say that I needed an induction because he was nervous that it was going to happen again.
Right.
So whenever I went in for my last appointment at 39 weeks, my blood pressure was 140 over 90. And so he literally didn't even say anything else. He just said, okay, you need to go into the hospital right now for an induction. And so me at the time being kind of scared, I was like, oh, okay. Do I have time to go home to get my bag or anything? And he said, no, you have to go to the hospital right now. So I drove to the hospital, called my husband. He met me there, and this was during COVID times too. So it was like craziness.
Yeah.
And so I did not need to get there right away because as soon as I got to the hospital and everything, it had dropped to normal ranges. Everything was fine, but whatever. And then had the baby like 12 hours later or something. So like, thankfully the induction went fine. But then whenever we had our fourth and fifth babies, it was like, I need to do something different because these experiences were not enjoyable at all. Like, this is not what it's supposed to be like. And I had just been really educating myself on what birth should look like and can look like if you're supported in the right way. And I was just blown away to be like, wow, I didn't even know that it was like a new world was opening up to me. It's like, I didn't even know that these things were possible. Like, you can give birth at your house. Like, I didn't even know that was a possibility, and which sounds so ridiculous, but it's true. I grew up, my mom's a doctor. I grew up in that world where it's like medicine, like
Yeah.
that is what is good. So whenever I was exploring this alternative route, like, oh, I didn't even know that this was a thing. So again, ended up having a home birth with my fourth, and it went pretty well. I was definitely scared,
I can
but I had
imagine.
two midwives who were so kind, who talked to me for hours about things and talked to my husband for a long time about everything. And then whenever I had my fifth, I leaned in even more and did a traditional birth companion course, figuring that even if I don't do anything with it, then it's like a great birth prep because it really taught me what physiological birth is. And physiological birth is just birth that's allowed to unfold as God has intended it without any augmentation, without anybody interfering in it. And I can tell you that, especially my last birth was a physiological birth, and it was the most, I almost, whenever, right after it happened, I was like, wow, I could totally do that again, which sounds crazy because it's like everybody depicts birth as this horrible, crazy, like terrible thing. But it is true that whenever you allow those hormones to work the way that they're supposed to work, it kind of, and like you really do want to do that again. So yeah, that's my big story of going from like this traumatic thing that happened to total 180 and really trusting in the design and now helping women to appreciate and understand their own design as well.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that because as you said, you had this progression from this first birth where you knew nothing to this last birth where you took a course and you decided to go with everything the way it was designed to do. And now you're using the knowledge that you gained in the experiences you experienced to help other women in their birth. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I took a traditional birth companion course with Billy Harrigan. And if you're not familiar, in Canada, you're not allowed to call yourself a midwife unless you work for the medical establishment. So that's why it's called a traditional birth companion, because um, they the course was not offered within the medical establishment, so therefore it would be illegal for her to call herself a midwife. But it really was like lay midwifery training, and it was super very intense, and it was a 10-month program. We met every single week, multiple times a week, and it was a lot, but it was great because what it really did was it gave you all of the information in terms of like from prenatal care to post birth, but it also really encouraged us to dig into our instincts and to really understand what it was that we felt like was best for us, and to therefore encourage other women that we would eventually support to trust their own instincts as well. So instead of just looking to a practitioner to say like, well, what should I do? It's really diving in and being like, well, what do you feel that you need and how can I support you instead? So it's flipping the model on its head. So again, we're typically in the States where we go to a practitioner and it's almost like we work for them, where it's like they tell us what to do.
Right.
Versus in this midwifery model, it's really is where we, the midwives, are supposed, or like the women helping women, are supposed to help women. That doesn't mean that we tell them what to do or anything like that. It's that if they request information, we give them the information, and then they can act on that information if they want to. So it's just a really different way of approaching it. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful way to do it. And then I also went through the Integrative Women's Health Institute to become a certified women's health coach. And I love the coaching model because same idea, where the coach never tells the client what to do. It's really is that it's client led, and that the client is the one who has all of the answers, and the coach is the one that's just helping the client figure out how to get those answers to come out and to be sustainable. So it's just a different way of thinking about it.
Well, one question popped into my head because you said that if the client asks for the information and then the coach shares the information, what if, like you were saying in the very beginning with your first pregnancy, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what information to ask for. Does the coach then, lead in a way that they help you decide what information you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in terms of like pregnancy directly, like regarding pregnancy, it is very normal for midwives, coaches, whomever the woman is working with, to give them like, here's kind of what's standard,
Mm-hmm.
but it's up to you if you accept or decline any of these things.
Okay.
Versus in the medical model, it really is more of like, at this week, you have to do this test. And they don't really even make it an option. It's more of like, technically, you can say no, but it's
Right.
really
Yeah.
no
It
in this
is.
model. Versus, again, in the more of like the midwifery or women-led model, it's more of, here's what you can do. If you want to do it, go do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. So it's just a different way of thinking about it. But so yeah, it's not like the woman has to go and find all of the information.
Mm-hmm.
The coach or the midwife can help support that finding information. Just
Right.
a more collaborative relationship instead of
Yes.
do this because I say to do this sort of thing.
Yes. And I think that that's something that, I don't know, maybe it was a COVID thing, but I think there were a lot more people who are, looking for information on their own, and they are trying to, learn what's best for their bodies and their life situations, as opposed to a uh, preset solution. And I think that's healthy, literally, and figuratively. It's healthy for everyone who's seeking medical care. And then it's just, I think it's just a healthier way to approach things.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
Individualized care instead of just mass, everybody do the same thing care.
yes, yes, agreed. So if somebody was interested in what you do and a more client-led approach, how would they find you, or how would they to do something like what you've been describing?
Yeah, so to find me specifically, I'm mostly on Instagram. Um, and my business is called Loretto Wellness. And if you are Catholic, you may understand the roots of that with the Litany of Loretto. If you're not Catholic, Loretto is essentially, I'm going to really shorten this, but it's where Mary's house is. There's more to it than that. But basically, like the home that Mary was raised in and raised Jesus in is in Loretto. And so it's just Loretto Wellness. I also have a website, Loretto Wellness. In terms of finding a coach, there's so many different ways to do that. In the coaching world, you do want to be aware that there is no real regulation on coaching. So, like, depending on what it is you're looking for, you might need somebody who might have a different background than some others. So, there are certifications. You can get board certified in coaching. So it kind of just depends on what it is that you're looking for. As far as what I offer is, I am a certified women's health coach. I have my board certification pending, so pray for me for that. And I do work typically with women who have experienced birth trauma and helping them to heal after trauma. And by heal, that means to really um, just feel at peace, feel strong, feel safe, stop feeling afraid to have any more children, and to just understand why things happen and to see Jesus in their story. But then it's interesting because usually whenever we start talking about birth, it brings up other things as well, like mother wounds, father wounds, trusting your instincts, doing what you want to do versus what the culture tells you to do. So it really is, even though I say it's birth trauma, it's really, we talk about everything around motherhood, womanhood, everything like that.
Well, it's interesting. You just said something there that reminded me of what you said earlier, in that, excuse me, you had some PTSD
Mm-hmm.
after the birth of your second child, and you said you were afraid to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And then now come full circle, and you are helping women to be able to ask for help
Yeah.
in a safe way, and to not be able, to not have to fear that somebody's going to come and take their child away because they can't do this or they don't know how to do that. And so it sounds like you're giving women some freedom to be able to not only help their children, but to help themselves, which ultimately helps their children.
Yes. And everybody. But that's one of the things I love about coaching is because there's not this, and mental health professionals are totally necessary in so many situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I was scared to reach out to a therapist because I was afraid that they're like mandated that they then have to, if they feel the child is in danger, that they have to do something about that. Versus with coaching, and my child was never in danger, like just to make that clear. With coaching, it's much it's more like a woman and a woman on a couch just chatting versus versus the clinical route. So I can still really help women, but it's in a very different way where it's like it's just a woman talking to a woman or like a neighbor talking to a neighbor. And it just kind of has this different air about it, where instead of, again, feeling very clinical and like heavy almost, I don't know, this is my interpretation of it. I have gone through therapy, so like I know both sides. I really love coaching because, again, it just seems more like goal oriented and like really moving forward and seeing the good in everything and like understanding that our stories do matter, but that moving forward is like ultimately what we're called to do.
Agree. And you just reminded me of, I think it's in this week's readings about Titus, where in the letter to Titus, women are instructed to help. Now, it specifically says older women helping the younger women, but I think that what you just described is an example of that. Mm-hmm. That, we don't necessarily need to consider age numbers, but it's, I think, older in terms of experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful example of that letter in Titus, or that chapter in Titus. So, all right. Well, one thing I like to ask everybody is if you have any warrior words to share with our listeners, whether it's about pregnancy, birth, coaching, motherhood.
Yeah, I have a few different like taglines that I always tell clients and just in general. And one of them is that, and again, I work with primarily Catholics or at least Christians, so that's why I bring Jesus into a lot of this. One of them is that God will use every situation for good. So you might not understand, like, how could he possibly bring good from this? But he will bring good from it. Whether that be, and this can be hard for people to hear, but whether that be that you had to go through that experience for yourself, or so that somebody witnessing your experience could be changed in some capacity. So, for example, I had a client who had a C-section, and as she was laying down, they asked her what music she wanted them to play, and she said, forget who it was, but it's say like Chris Tomlin or something like that. And so she was like, and I don't know why, because I don't even really like him, but in that moment, like that's what came into my head. Mm-hmm. So, and then she said that afterwards, like the nurse came up to her and said, like, thank you for playing that song. I really needed to hear it. So, not to say that what she went through wasn't at all difficult and like terrible, but you never know whenever somebody seeing your experience might also be changed because of what you're going through. Oh. So like if that woman never had that C-section, maybe that nurse wouldn't have heard that song, which then changed, I don't know, her life.
Oh, see,
so he will bring good out of every single situation. Even if we don't get to see the results now, we will see the results eventually. Mm-hmm. So just to trust that good will come from everything. And also just in general too, that your body is made really good. Your instincts are the Holy Spirit trying to guide you. So listen to them and just, again, really try to trust yourself.
Very good. Oh, I love them both. And then the other thing that I like to hear is there any beauty in the broken situation, such as, any beauty that you may have noticed going through your difficult pregnancies, or just looking back? Now, I realize that Loretto Wellness is definitely beautiful fruit that has come from your experiences. But is there any other beauty in the broken that you can think of and share with our listeners?
Yeah, and this is sort of a really silly story, so I'm sorry if it sounds really, really weird. So
No
I,
worries.
so I had always wanted to use cloth diapers. I don't know why, I just had this desire to. And I was really scared to. And this sounds really dumb, but like my family is not super into that sort of thing. Really want to use cloth diapers. But if I use them, then everybody's going to talk about it. Da, da, da. And then after I had my experience with everything, and like I really was forced to dig in and like do the hard work of repairing myself after what I went through, I finally was like, I'm going to use cloth diapers because I don't really care what people say anymore. Everybody has
Mhm.
an like, and just all these, something about that experience made my brain be like, stop thinking about what everybody else says and just do it because like you literally could die at any time. Like I have this memory as the door's closing, my husband's standing at the OR door, and I see the door closing and like this big light ahead of me, like the surgical light. So that was like a really important reminder to be like, that could be the last time that I see him. Thankfully, it wasn't. So again, the diapers thing was just really like, if you want to do the diapers, do the diapers.
Yeah.
And we've been doing the diapers ever since. And it's really silly, but that was like the first step into me kind of doing whatever I want to do now in terms of like in a good way. So
Right.
no longer doing what other people want me to do. It's really what is it that I want to do for my own sanctification and for my children's too. So just it gave me the confidence to really step into who I am and who I'm called to be. Now I'm still very imperfect, unfortunately. Um, but
We
I can at
always
least,
will be this side of heaven, correct?
yes, but I can at least say that most of the time I'm doing what feels really aligned with my heart, which I know is what God has placed there. So every situation he'll bring good out of.
Very good. Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to make sure that I get you said you were primarily on Instagram. I will get
Mhm.
that and your website in the show notes so that everybody can click over and join you there. And I just want to thank you. Thank you for your time and your vulnerability, your willingness to share, um, all the different experiences that you had and how it kind of progressed and led to something absolutely beautiful. So,
Yeah,
thank,
thank you so much for allowing me to share it.
yes, thank you very much. All right. Bye, everyone. It is amazing to me to hear birth stories gone wrong, followed up by a willingness to go through pregnancy and birth again later. I know for myself, I often look back and wonder what it was that fueled my desire to have another child after my first delivery was so traumatic. But now that it's been more than 2 decades, my memory doesn't offer any specific reasons anymore. What I do know is that my life would be drastically different without either one of my children. And I'm so grateful that I had both of them. In Brigid's story, she shared that she went on to have pregnancies, and four of them had challenges. It wasn't until that fifth pregnancy that she had the knowledge and the voice to advocate for what was in the best interests of her health and that of her child. This journey of knowledge, training, and self discovery, or maybe more accurately, the discovery of God's design for pregnancy and delivery, they brought her from trauma through PTSD and fear of asking for help to the ability to use her voice and advocate for a natural delivery in the way it was intended to be. Now, you may be screaming at your podcast player right now saying something like, Heather, not all births can happen this way. And you'd be right. If you listen to episodes 13 and 14, where I discuss my son, I share that his birth story was traumatic. I wanted a home birth, but it turns out that both of us might have died if I had done that. But what does line up with what I'm saying is that if the doctors and nurses had listened to me, or if I had insisted more, the trauma would have likely had been reduced. Wait, that wasn't grammatically correct. The trauma would have more likely been reduced. But what mine and Brigid's experiences, although different, teach us is that medicine is not one size fits all. It can't be, because every body is different. Every situation is different. We have to educate ourselves and speak up for what our intuition and Holy Spirit is telling us. Doctors are human beings. No matter what level of training and education they have, they make mistakes, as all humans do. We need to partner with our medical professionals. We have choices now that our previous generations didn't have. We can become informed. We can interview our doctors. We can choose those with whom we want to work. If a doctor's values don't align with yours, choose another one. If a doctor isn't listening, choose another one. Like Brigid's story of discovering beauty in cloth diapers, this was something she felt that was best for her child. And she, at first, allowed others to dissuade her. But she discovered beauty in making up her own mind and deciding to make this choice despite what others thought or said. It was right for her child, and it was right for her. There is beauty in making decisions based on knowledge and Holy Spirit intuition, and then using your voice to advocate for them. What decision can you make through the prompting of the Holy Spirit instead of what society or others says you should do? Something to think about this week. So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words.